Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories.
The day I returned from my trip abroad, I couldn't believe my eyes. As I drove down the long, winding driveway to my property, something felt off. The familiar canopy of trees that usually greeted me was conspicuously absent. My heart raced as I approached my house, dreading what I might find. As I crested the final hill, my jaw dropped. The sprawling landscape I had cultivated over years was unrecognizable. Where once stood a majestic forest, now lay barren earth dotted with stumps like gravestones marking the passing of my beloved trees. And my barn, the beautiful rustic structure that had been a cornerstone of my property for decades, was completely gone. Leaving behind nothing but a flat patch of dirt, I slammed on the brakes, my truck skidding to a halt. Jumping out, I stood there in shock, my mind reeling as I tried to process the devastation before me. The air felt different, exposed. The gentle rustling of leaves that had always been my home's soundtrack was replaced by an eerie silence. What the hell happened here? I muttered to myself, my voice barely above a whisper. As if on cue, I heard the crunch of gravel behind me. Turning around, I saw a sleek black SUV pulling up. The driver's door opened, and out stepped the last person I wanted to see, Harold Pinkerton, the insufferable HOA president from the neighboring development. Harold sauntered towards me, a smug smile plastered across his face. "Welcome back," he said, his voice dripping with false pleasantry. "I see you've noticed the improvements we've made to your property." "Improvements?" I sputtered, my shock quickly giving way to rage. "You call this an improvement? You've destroyed my land." Harold's smile didn't waver. Now, he said, holding up his hands in a placating gesture that only served to infuriate me further. "Let's not be dramatic. We simply took the liberty of bringing your property up to code while you were away." "Up to code?" I practically shouted. "This is my land, Pinkerton. You have no jurisdiction here. We settled this in court, remember?" "Ah, yes," Harold replied, his tone maddeningly calm. "But you see, there have been some changes since you've been gone. The county has expanded our HOA's reach, and your property now falls within our purview." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "That's impossible," I said, my voice HOAS. Harold pulled out a folder from his jacket. "I assure you it's quite possible. Here are the documents signed and notarized. Your land is now part of our community, and as such, it needs to adhere to our standards." I snatched the papers from his hand, my eyes scanning the legal jargon. To my horror, it appeared legitimate. But how, and why wasn't I notified? "This can't be legal," I said, my mind racing. "I never agreed to this." Harold shrugged. "The county made the decision. Your extended absence made it difficult to reach you for comment. But don't worry, we've taken care of everything." "Taken care of everything," I repeated, my voice rising. "You've destroyed my property, my barn, my trees. They're all gone." "The barn was an eyesore," Harold said dismissively. "And those trees were blocking the view for our residents. We're creating a harmonious community here. And your rustic aesthetic simply didn't fit." I could feel my blood boiling. "You had no right," I growled. "On the contrary," Harold replied, his smug smile returning. "We had every right. And there's more to come. We'll be sending you a detailed list of further improvements that need to be made. Your house, for instance, will need to be repainted to match our approved color scheme." I took a menacing step towards Harold, my fists clenched. "Get off my property," I said through gritted teeth. Harold took a step back, his smile faltering for the first time. "Now let's not do anything rash," he said. "Remember, we're all part of the same community now. We should be working together, not against each other." "Community," I spat. "You call this a community? You've destroyed everything I've built here." "Progress often requires sacrifice," Harold said, retreating towards his SUV. "You'll see in time that this is for the best. We're increasing property values, creating a more attractive neighborhood for everyone." As Harold climbed back into his vehicle, he called out, "Oh, and you might want to mow your lawn. It's getting a bit unruly. We'd hate to have to issue a fine." With that, he drove off, leaving me standing alone in the wreckage of my once beautiful property. I spent the next few hours in a daze wandering around my land trying to come to terms with the destruction. Each stump I passed felt like a wound, each empty space where a structure once stood a void in my heart. This land had been in my family for generations, and in a matter of months it had been stripped of its character, its history. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the barren landscape, I found myself sitting on my porch, staring out at the unfamiliar vista. The neighboring development, once hidden behind a wall of green, now stood in stark relief against the horizon. Lights flickered on in the cookie-cutter houses, a stark contrast to the darkness settling over my property. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from my old friend and lawyer, Judith. "Heard you were back in town. Everything okay?" I hesitated for a moment before replying, "No, everything is not okay. Can you come over? I need your help." Judith arrived within the hour, her expression changing from concern to shock as she took in the altered landscape. "Oh my God," she breathed as she got out of her car. "What happened here?" I filled her in on everything Harold had told me, showing her the documents he'd left behind. Judith's brow furrowed as she read through them, her lawyer's mind already at work. "This doesn't add up," she said finally, looking up at me. "The county can't just arbitrarily expand an HOA's jurisdiction without notifying the affected property owners. And even if they could, it wouldn't give the HOA the right to make changes to your property without your consent." A glimmer of hope sparked in my chest. "So what you're saying is—" "What I'm saying," Judith interrupted, her eyes glinting with determination, "is that we're going to fight this. Harold and his HOA cronies have overstepped big time. We're going to take them to court, and we're going to make them pay for every tree they cut down, every building they demolished." For the first time since I'd returned home, I felt a smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "Where do we start?" Judith was already pulling out her laptop. "First, we document everything. We need before and after photos, satellite imagery if we can get it. Then we start building our case. We'll need to challenge the county's decision, prove that proper procedures weren't followed." As we worked into the night, gathering evidence and forming our strategy, I felt my despair slowly giving way to determination. This fight was far from over. The next morning, I woke up early, the enormity of the task ahead weighing heavily on my mind. As I stepped outside to survey my altered property in the harsh light of day, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A group of workers was setting up equipment at the edge of my land, near where my barn had once stood. I stormed over, my anger from yesterday reigniting. "What do you think you're doing?" I demanded. The foreman, a burly man in a hard hat, looked up from his clipboard. "We're here to begin construction on the new community center," he said matter-of-factly. "Community center?" I echoed, disbelief coloring my voice. "This is private property. You can't build here." The foreman shrugged. "We've got all the necessary permits," he said, handing me a stack of papers, signed off by the HOA and the county. "Construction starts today." I snatched the papers from him, my mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. Not again. Just then I heard the now familiar sound of Harold's SUV pulling up. He got out, that infuriating smile still on his face. "Ah, I see you've met our construction team," he said, walking over. "Exciting, isn't it? This community center will be a wonderful addition to our neighborhood." I rounded on him, fury coursing through my veins. "This ends now, Pinkerton," I growled. "You have no right to be here, no right to build on my land." Harold's smile didn't waver. "I think you'll find we have every right," he said smoothly. "As I explained yesterday, your property is now part of our community, and the community has voted for this center." "I never voted for this," I shot back. "Oh, but you did," Harold replied, his eyes glinting. "By not attending our meetings, by not participating in our community decisions, you essentially abstained. And in our bylaws, abstention is considered a yes vote." I felt like I was trapped in some kind of bizarre nightmare. How could this be happening? Just then, Judith's car pulled up. She got out, taking in the scene with a lawyer's keen eye. "What's going on here?" she asked, coming to stand beside me. I quickly filled her in on the situation. Judith's eyes narrowed as she listened, her gaze fixed on Harold. "Mr. Pinkerton," she said, her voice cool and professional. "I'm Judith Thompson, attorney at law. I'll be representing my client in this matter. I suggest you cease all activities on this property immediately, or you'll be facing a lawsuit for trespassing and destruction of private property." Harold's smile finally faltered. "Now there's no need for threats," he said, his voice losing some of its confidence. "We're all reasonable people here. Surely we can come to some sort of agreement." "The only agreement," Judith replied, "will be you and your HOA paying for all damages and returning this property to its original state. Now I suggest you and your construction crew leave immediately." Harold hesitated for a moment, clearly weighing his options. Finally he nodded to the foreman. "Pack it up, boys," he said. "We'll continue this another day." As the workers began to dismantle their equipment, Harold turned back to us. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low. "We have the law on our side." "We'll see about that," Judith replied coolly. As Harold drove away and the construction crew packed up, I felt a mix of relief and trepidation. We'd won this round, but I knew the fight was far from over. Judith turned to me, her expression serious. "We've got a long road ahead of us," she said. "Are you ready for this?" I looked out over my ravaged land, remembering how it used to be, imagining how it could be again. I thought of my parents, of the generations before them who had called this place home. I thought of the peace and solitude I'd always found here, now shattered by the encroaching development and Harold's ruthless ambition. "I'm ready," I said, my resolve hardening. "This is my home, and I'm going to fight for it with everything I've got." Judith nodded, a small smile on her face. "Then let's get to work," she said. "We've got a case to build and an HOA to take down." As we walked back to the house to begin our legal battle, I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but with Judith by my side and justice on our side, I believed we had a fighting chance. The war with Harold Pinkerton and his HOA was just beginning, and I was determined to see it through to the end, whatever the cost. This land was my heritage, my home, and my future, and I would not let it go without a fight. Lol, this story is wild. I mean, who hasn't had fantasies about taking revenge on their annoying HOA? But this takes it to a whole new level. It's like the author took every HOA horror story they've ever heard and mashed them all together into one insane narrative. I kinda love it, even if it's totally unrealistic. It's like the Sharknado of HOA stories. So bad it's good. I'd watch this movie, not gonna lie. Someone get Nicolas Cage on the phone to play Harold the HOA president. It'd be a blockbuster. Are you kidding me? This HOA president is a straight-up villain. Who does he think he is, destroying someone's property like that? It's infuriating how these power-hungry jerks can just waltz in and wreck people's lives. I hope the homeowner sues the pants off this Harold guy and the entire HOA board. It's about time someone stood up to these neighborhood tyrants. The fact that they could even consider building a community center on private property is insane. I'm glad the lawyer showed up to put them in their place, but this whole situation is just maddening. HOAs need to be reined in or abolished altogether. No one should have to live in fear of losing their home and land to these petty dictators. I can't believe people are taking this story seriously. It's clearly meant to be satire, folks. The author is using exaggeration to highlight the very real issues that exist with HOAs and property rights. Yes, it's over the top, but that's the point. It's meant to make you think about how much power we give to these organizations and how easily that power can be abused. The story is tapping into the fear and frustration that many homeowners feel when dealing with overbearing HOAs. Is it realistic? Of course not. But it's not meant to be. It's a thought experiment, a what-if scenario taken to the extreme. Instead of nitpicking the legal inaccuracies, we should be discussing the underlying issues it raises. How much control should HOAs have? What rights do property owners have? How can we balance community standards with individual freedoms? These are the real questions the story is asking us to consider, and they're worth discussing.
If you like our stories, then please like and subscribe and comment, and remember to hit that bell icon so you never miss out. We have new stories almost every day.
The fake HOA. I had lived in the neighborhood for nearly 5 years, paying my HOA dues every month like clockwork. It wasn't a choice. I got a bill in the mail, and I paid it. Everyone did. We grumbled about the fees, sure, but what could we do? That's how neighborhoods worked. At least that's what we all believed. Then one day, my neighbor Jillian knocked on my door, looking furious. Her face was flushed, and she was gripping a crumpled piece of paper so tightly that her knuckles were white. "You have got to see this," she snapped, shoving the paper toward me like it was burning her fingers. I barely had time to react before she forced it into my hands. "Jillian, what?" I started, but she cut me off with a sharp shake of her head. "Just look at it," she demanded, crossing her arms over her chest as she paced in front of my porch. "Tell me I'm not losing my mind." I smoothed out the paper and scanned it, my eyes quickly locking onto the words that had clearly sent her into a rage. It was a property tax assessment for her home, but the part that stood out was a line about HOA fees, or rather, the complete absence of them. My brow furrowed. "Wait a minute," I muttered. "Where's the HOA listing?" Jillian turned on her heel and stabbed a finger at the document. "Exactly. There's no HOA registered for this community," she said, her voice rising with every word. I checked twice. The county has nothing on file, no filings, no legal entity, nothing. "Do you know what that means?" I exhaled sharply, the weight of her words sinking in. "It means we've been paying into a ghost organization." I felt my stomach drop. "That doesn't make sense," I said. "We've been paying dues for years. Who the hell are we paying?" Jillian's eyes burned with anger. "That's exactly what I want to find out." We started digging. The so-called HOA had a president, a treasurer, and a few other board members. All of them lived in the biggest houses in the neighborhood, the ones with pristine yards, fancy landscaping, and brand-new cars parked in the driveway. At first, I assumed they were just well off, maybe had good jobs or came from money, but now I had questions. Jillian, myself, and a few other residents started making phone calls. We went to the county offices, looked up property records, and did everything we could to figure out if this HOA was legitimate. And the deeper we dug, the worse it got. The HOA was a complete fraud. No legal entity, no documentation, no tax filings. The board members had been collecting our money for years, and they weren't spending it on the neighborhood. No community maintenance, no amenities, no reserve funds, just bank accounts in their names and expenses that didn't add up. We weren't funding a homeowners association. We were funding their lives. Armed with proof, we decided to confront them at the next HOA meeting. It was held in the clubhouse, one of the few things we assumed our dues paid for. But now we weren't so sure. The meeting started like usual, with the president Greg sitting at the head of the table in his expensive suit, acting like he was the king of the neighborhood. His wife Karen was right beside him, flipping through papers like she was running a Fortune 500 company. The rest of the board sat smugly, as if they actually held some authority. Jillian wasted no time. "Where's the HOA's registration paperwork?" she demanded, slamming a folder onto the table. Greg blinked. "Excuse me, don't play dumb. We checked with the county. There is no HOA registered here." A murmur went through the room. Homeowners shifted uncomfortably in their seats, whispering to each other. Greg's expression tightened, but he still put on a show of being unbothered. "That's ridiculous," he said. "We've been managing this community for years." "No, you've been robbing this community for years," I cut in. "We know there's no legal HOA, so where has all our money been going?" Karen's face turned red. "This is slander," she snapped. "We've done nothing wrong." "Then show us the records," Jillian shot back. "Prove that the HOA exists." Greg let out a nervous laugh. "This isn't how things work. If you have concerns, you can file a request through the proper channels." "What proper channels?" I said. "You aren't a real HOA. You have no legal standing. You're just a bunch of con artists who've been taking our money." The room erupted. Homeowners were on their feet, shouting questions, demanding answers. Greg held up his hands, trying to calm everyone down, but the panic was already spreading. "Everyone needs to relax," he said, but his voice cracked. "There's a misunderstanding." Jillian wasn't having it. "Misunderstanding my ass? I looked up your financials. Or should I say, your lack of financials. You've been collecting thousands of dollars from us, and there's no record of where it's gone." Karen grabbed Greg's arm. "We need to end this meeting," she hissed. "Oh no, you're not running from this," I said. "Where's the money?" Greg's eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape. But there wasn't one. People were furious. Some had their phones out, recording. Others were throwing out accusations. Vacations, new cars, remodeling, everything the so-called board members owned suddenly made a lot more sense. Then someone shouted, "Call the police." Greg's face drained of color. Karen grabbed her purse and stood up. "We don't have to sit here and be attacked," she said. But no one was letting them leave. A few residents blocked the door. "You're not going anywhere until you answer some questions," one man growled. The police did show up eventually. Greg and Karen were sweating by then, trying to come up with excuses, but nothing they said mattered anymore. We had proof. The fake HOA was finished. But that didn't mean we were getting our money back. The police took reports, but the wheels of justice moved slow. And as for Greg and Karen, they lawyered up fast. Suddenly, all the money they had stolen was going toward legal fees. The case dragged on, and while the fraud was undeniable, actually recovering anything was another battle entirely. And the rest of us, we were left to pick up the pieces. Years of payments gone. No one to maintain the community, no reserve funds, just a bunch of angry homeowners who had been scammed out of thousands of dollars with nothing to show for it. In the end, the only real consequence for Greg and Karen was that they had to move. They sold their house, packed up, and left town, probably to start their scam somewhere else. And we were left arguing over what to do next. Some wanted to form a real HOA, others wanted nothing to do with it. But one thing was for sure, we'd never trust anyone with our money again. So let me get this straight, this fake HOA just people's money for years, and no one questioned it. Not one person demanded a breakdown of expenses. I swear, these scam artists thrive on the fact that most people don't want to make waves. And of course, the second they get called out, they try to run. They didn't even have the brains to come up with a cover story. The worst part, they'll probably do it again somewhere else because there's no real justice for this kind of fraud. The homeowners get screwed, the crooks walk, and the legal system takes forever to sort anything out. This whole thing just proves that HOAs, real or fake, are nothing more than glorified rackets run by control freaks and con artists. Burn them all down. This is hilarious and sad at the same time. An entire neighborhood just blindly paid into a fake HOA for years without ever asking for proof it was real. It's like watching a scam email play out in real life. Congratulations, you owe us money, send payments immediately, and they did. No questions, no research, just payments, every month. The scammers barely even had to try. Of course, once they got caught, they ran. That's what scammers do. But the fact that this went on for so long without anyone noticing, that's the real horror story. I guarantee you there are other neighborhoods out there getting scammed the same way. People are way too trusting, and HOAs, fake or real, are the easiest way to milk them dry. Another HOA nightmare. These power-tripping organizations are the bane of homeowners everywhere. I'm not surprised it turned out to be a scam. That's basically what all HOAs are anyway. Legal or not, they're just excuses for nosy neighbors to control everyone's lives and property. The only difference here is that these scammers were more blatant about lining their own pockets. At least in a real HOA, they pretend the money goes towards community improvements. The whole concept needs to be abolished. People should be free to do what they want with their own property without some wannabe dictator telling them what color their fence can be or how long their grass should be. This story just proves what we've all known all along. HOAs are nothing but trouble.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.